It reportedly happened behind closed doors in one of the most heavily guarded rooms inside Buckingham Palace. A directive carrying Prince William's authority was allegedly delivered without warning, and within hours, whispers began spreading through royal corridors. According to palace insiders, Meghan Markle's remaining royal jewelry collection had suddenly become the subject of an extraordinary review. What began as a quiet administrative action would soon ignite one of the most explosive inheritance battles the monarchy has faced in years. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, the reports sounded almost too extraordinary to believe. Royal inventories are not uncommon. The monarchy oversees countless historical assets, heirlooms, ceremonial objects, and collections whose value stretches far beyond money. Yet those familiar with palace operations suggest that this particular review was different. The level of discretion was unusual. The speed was unusual. And perhaps most telling of all, the silence that followed was even more unusual. According to various interpretations emerging from royal circles, the discussion centered on several pieces allegedly connected to Meghan's time as a working member of the royal family. These were not merely decorative accessories or personal keepsakes. In the eyes of the institution, certain items carried symbolic significance, representing continuity, service, and the delicate balance between individual privilege and institutional responsibility. Reports suggest questions had quietly surfaced regarding how such pieces should be classified moving forward, especially as the monarchy entered a period of transition unlike any it had experienced in decades. As whispers intensified, attention quickly turned toward Prince William. Over the past several years, observers have noted a gradual but unmistakable shift within royal operations. While King Charles remains sovereign, many insiders claim William's influence has expanded significantly behind the scenes. Administrative decisions, strategic planning, and long-term discussions regarding the future of the crown increasingly appear to bear his imprint. Some commentators have even described him as operating as a king in waiting, quietly preparing for responsibilities that once seemed distant, but now feel increasingly immediate. That growing authority reportedly played a central role in the unfolding controversy. Sources familiar with internal procedures suggest that palace officials were instructed to conduct a comprehensive review of certain holdings linked to former working royals. Security personnel were allegedly consulted as part of standard asset verification processes. Administrative records were reportedly examined. Documentation was reviewed. Access histories were checked. None of this necessarily indicated wrongdoing. Yet the scale of the effort immediately fueled speculation that something much larger was taking place beneath the surface. Meanwhile, palace staff were said to be operating under unusually strict confidentiality guidelines. Those who normally interacted with administrative departments reportedly found information channels suddenly restricted. Routine conversations became noticeably cautious. Even among experienced royal aides, insiders whisper that uncertainty began spreading rapidly. The lack of public clarification only deepened the mystery. In an institution built upon carefully controlled messaging, silence often speaks louder than any official statement. Outside palace walls, rumors began moving even faster. Royal correspondents, commentators, and social media observers seized upon fragments of information. Every unexplained detail became fuel for fresh speculation. Some believed the review reflected broader succession planning connected to King Charles's ongoing health challenges. Others argued it represented an effort to establish clearer boundaries between personal possessions and assets considered part of the monarchy's historical legacy. No definitive answers emerged, but one thing became increasingly apparent. The story had evolved far beyond a routine administrative matter. As discussions spread across newspapers, television panels, and online forums, the symbolism surrounding the alleged review became impossible to ignore. Jewelry within royal history has never been merely about gemstones or precious metals. Each piece often carries decades, sometimes centuries, of institutional meaning. A necklace may represent a state visit. A bruch may symbolize diplomatic ties. A tiara may connect generations of royal women through a chain of inheritance stretching back across history itself. That is why even the suggestion of an extraordinary review immediately captured public attention. Yet beneath the headlines and speculation, another question quietly emerged. If reports of this review were accurate, why now? Why would such a sensitive matter surface during a period already marked by uncertainty, succession planning, and shifting power dynamics within the House of Windsor? Why would palace officials allegedly move with such urgency? And why were so many insiders suddenly treating what appeared to be a simple inventory exercise as something far more significant? The answers, according to those closest to the story, may have very little to do with jewelry itself. Because behind every whispered allegation, every confidential review, and every carefully guarded conversation, lies a deeper struggle, one rooted in ownership, authority, and the future direction of the monarchy. The reported review may have concerned physical objects, but the real battle was always about something much larger. It was about who controls royal legacy, who safeguards institutional history, and who ultimately decides what belongs to the crown and what belongs to the individual. And as more details began to surface, it became increasingly clear that this wasn't really about jewelry, it was about ownership, legacy, and a decades-old royal safeguard few outsiders even knew existed. To the public, royal jewels sparkle beneath palace chandeliers. But inside the House of Windsor, they represent something far more powerful: legitimacy, continuity, and control. That is what makes the rumors surrounding the alleged review so much more significant than they first appeared. As speculation spread through royal circles, attention gradually shifted away from individual gemstones and toward a far larger question: what exactly belongs to a royal family member, and what belongs to the monarchy itself? For generations, that distinction has remained one of the least understood yet most fiercely protected principles inside the institution. While many observers see royal jewelry as personal possessions worn by princes, princesses, queens, and duchesses, insiders have long maintained that some pieces occupy a very different category altogether. According to royal historians and various interpretations of palace traditions, there exists a clear separation between personal gifts, privately purchased items, and treasures held in trust for the crown. The difference may appear subtle to outsiders, but within the monarchy, it can mean everything. One necklace may belong entirely to an individual. Another may be regarded as part of a collection intended to serve future generations of the royal family. The distinction is not simply financial. It is constitutional, symbolic, and deeply connected to the survival of the institution itself. That philosophy has shaped royal stewardship for centuries. Reports suggest that long before modern headlines and public controversies, monarchs understood the danger of allowing historically significant treasures to become fragmented through inheritance disputes or personal decisions. As a result, many important pieces gradually became associated not with a particular individual, but with the enduring role of the crown. They were treated less like possessions and more like responsibilities. Their purpose was not merely to adorn one generation, but to connect successive generations to a shared legacy. Few figures embodied that principle more completely than Queen Elizabeth II. Throughout her 70-year reign, she was widely viewed as the ultimate guardian of royal continuity. Various royal commentators have often described her approach to historic assets as disciplined, methodical, and deeply institutional. Whether dealing with palaces, archives, artworks, or jewelry, the emphasis remained consistent. The treasures of the monarchy were expected to outlive the individuals entrusted with them. In many ways, her stewardship established the framework that continues to influence royal decision-making today. The royal collection itself reflects that philosophy. Housing countless objects accumulated across centuries, it represents one of the world's most significant cultural holdings. Yet according to those familiar with royal protocols, its value cannot be measured solely through wealth. Every item carries historical meaning. Every object contributes to a larger narrative about continuity and legitimacy. Jewelry occupies a particularly sensitive place within that system, because it often becomes associated with public identity. A single brooch or tiara can instantly evoke memories of state occasions, diplomatic visits, family milestones, and national moments that transcend any one individual. That symbolic power explains why disputes involving royal heirlooms have historically generated such intense interest. Various interpretations of past royal disagreements reveal recurring tensions between personal wishes and institutional expectations. While details often remain private, the underlying issue rarely changes. The monarchy views certain treasures as part of a collective inheritance, while individuals may naturally see them through a more personal lens. It is a conflict that has surfaced repeatedly throughout royal history, sometimes quietly, and sometimes with extraordinary consequences. And that is precisely why recent whispers have captured so much attention. Because as commentators continued debating ownership, stewardship, and royal tradition, another unsettling detail began emerging from behind palace walls. According to various interpretations, this was not a concern that appeared overnight. Questions had reportedly been raised long before the public heard a single rumor. Administrative discussions may have already been taking place. Reviews may have quietly been conducted. And according to various interpretations, concerns about certain pieces had been quietly building for months. Long before any alleged seizure took place, insiders whisper that alarm bells were already ringing behind palace walls. If the previous reports are to be believed, the concerns surrounding certain royal pieces did not emerge suddenly. They were not sparked by a single conversation, a single disagreement, or a single administrative review. Instead, various interpretations suggest they were part of a growing unease that had been quietly developing for years. Beneath the public headlines, beneath the carefully managed statements, and beneath the ongoing tensions that have come to define relations between the Sussexes and the wider royal family, questions were reportedly beginning to surface about the future. Not merely the future of individuals, but the future of assets, traditions, and the institutional legacy that generations of royals had spent their lives protecting. According to palace observers, one of the most sensitive questions concerned ownership. As long as Queen Elizabeth II remained on the throne, many long-standing conventions remained largely unquestioned. Her authority was unique. Her stewardship was trusted. Her presence provided stability even during moments of internal disagreement. But following her passing, and as King Charles faced ongoing health challenges, reports suggest that discussions inside royal circles began taking on a greater sense of urgency. Suddenly, the future seemed closer than anyone had expected. Plans that might once have been considered distant concerns reportedly became immediate priorities. At the center of those discussions, insiders claim, was a growing awareness that unresolved questions could eventually become future disputes. What would happen to historically significant pieces connected to former working royals? How would assets be classified as the monarchy continued evolving? And perhaps most importantly, how could the institution ensure that treasures viewed as part of its historical identity remain protected for future generations? These were not questions that generated public headlines. They were the kind of conversations that occurred quietly, behind layers of discretion, where decisions were measured not in months, but in decades. At the same time, the distance between Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, and the institution itself appeared wider than ever. Their departure from royal duties had already transformed family dynamics. Subsequent interviews, documentaries, memoirs, and public disagreements only deepened the divide. According to various interpretations, that growing separation inevitably raised concerns among those responsible for safeguarding royal traditions. The further the relationship drifted, the more some insiders reportedly worried about how certain assets, privileges, and symbols of royal identity would be viewed in the years ahead. Meanwhile, another shift was unfolding within palace operations. As King Charles focused on his responsibilities while navigating significant health concerns, observers increasingly noted the expanding influence of Prince William. Alongside him stood Princess Anne, widely regarded as one of the monarchy's most experienced and disciplined figures. Together, they were increasingly viewed as central pillars of institutional continuity. Reports suggest that both were playing larger roles in discussions involving long-term planning, preservation strategies, and the protection of royal heritage. That influence reportedly extended into a series of internal reviews. While details remain largely speculative, various royal commentators have suggested that administrative assessments were quietly underway across several areas of palace management. Some focused on succession planning. Others reportedly examined asset stewardship and institutional safeguards. None of this necessarily indicated conflict, yet the timing was difficult to ignore. As uncertainty surrounding the monarchy's future grew, so too did efforts to strengthen the systems designed to protect it. For those involved, the issue was never simply about property. It was about history itself. Every generation inherits a responsibility to preserve what previous generations protected. Every monarch serves as a temporary custodian of something larger than themselves. According to those familiar with royal traditions, that belief lies at the heart of the institution's survival. And if concerns truly were growing behind palace walls, they were rooted in a fear that certain boundaries could become blurred at a moment when clarity mattered most. As weeks passed, whispers became discussions. Discussions became reviews. Reviews reportedly became recommendations. What had once existed as a quiet concern among a handful of insiders was gradually moving closer to the center of royal decision-making. Few outside the institution noticed the shift at first. Fewer still understood its significance. But according to various interpretations, a decisive moment was approaching, one that would transform months of private concern into a matter of immediate action. Then came the meeting that reportedly changed everything. If reports are accurate, this was the moment Prince William stopped observing and started acting. For months, according to various interpretations circulating within royal circles, questions had been building behind closed doors. Concerns regarding stewardship, concerns regarding legacy, concerns regarding what would happen if sensitive issues were allowed to drift unresolved during one of the most uncertain periods the monarchy had faced in decades. Yet despite the growing whispers, no decisive action appeared to emerge. Discussions remained discussions. Reviews remained reviews. Recommendations remained buried within administrative channels. Then, according to insiders, something changed. The meeting that had been quietly anticipated by palace observers finally took place. Details remain heavily disputed, and no official account has ever surfaced. But multiple interpretations suggest that senior figures gathered to discuss matters extending far beyond individual assets. The conversation was reportedly framed around continuity, preservation, and the long-term protection of royal holdings. Those familiar with palace traditions claim the stakes were unusually high, because the discussion touched upon a fundamental principle that has guided the institution for generations: the belief that certain treasures belong not to individuals, but to the crown itself. It was during this period, according to palace whispers, that an internal framework allegedly began taking shape. Insiders have referred to it by a dramatic name: the Royal Vault Protocol. Whether the doctrine formally existed or merely served as shorthand for a broader strategy remains unclear. Yet according to those who describe its purpose, the concept was straightforward. Any asset carrying significant institutional value would be subjected to enhanced review procedures designed to ensure proper stewardship, documentation, and long-term protection. To supporters, it was not a punishment, it was a safeguard. To critics, however, it represented something far more consequential. At the center of this alleged initiative stood Prince William. Over recent years, his influence within royal operations had reportedly expanded considerably. But this moment felt different. This was no longer the role of an heir quietly preparing for future responsibilities. According to various interpretations, this was the role of a leader determined to establish order before uncertainty could create instability. And standing alongside him, insiders claim, was Princess Anne, one of the monarchy's most respected defenders of tradition. The partnership between William and Anne reportedly became increasingly significant as discussions progressed. While William represented the institution's future, Anne embodied decades of experience navigating royal challenges. Together, they were often described by commentators as a powerful combination of continuity and discipline. Sources suggest that both shared a common concern: protecting the monarchy's long-term interests during a period marked by family divisions, public scrutiny, and questions about the future. Soon afterward, reports began emerging of expanded administrative reviews. Records were allegedly re-examined. Classifications were reportedly reassessed. Historical documentation became the subject of renewed attention. None of these actions were necessarily extraordinary when viewed individually. Yet taken together, they suggested a level of scrutiny far greater than usual. According to palace observers, the institution was no longer simply monitoring developments. It was actively preparing for them. Legal advisors were also reportedly consulted as part of the process. Various interpretations suggest specialists were asked to review long-standing arrangements involving ownership, custodianship, and institutional assets. The objective, insiders claim, was not confrontation, but clarity. However, within an institution where every detail carries symbolic weight, even a search for clarity can produce enormous consequences. At the same time, palace inventory procedures allegedly entered a new phase. Existing records were reviewed against current classifications. Verification processes intensified. Administrative safeguards were strengthened. Security oversight reportedly increased as well, with greater attention devoted to ensuring that historically significant items remained properly documented and protected. To some observers, these measures appeared routine. To others, they signaled something far more serious, a growing determination to prevent uncertainty from becoming vulnerability. And that is why the atmosphere surrounding the alleged review began shifting so dramatically. What had once been viewed as an internal administrative matter was gradually transforming into a broader struggle over authority, stewardship, and the future direction of the monarchy itself. The Royal Vault Protocol, whether real or symbolic, had reportedly set powerful forces into motion. Questions that had lingered in the background for months were suddenly moving toward resolution. Decisions were approaching. Boundaries were being defined. And for Meghan, however, the consequences were only beginning. Sources close to royal circles suggest the reaction was immediate and deeply personal. If the alleged reviews, consultations, and heightened oversight had been viewed inside palace walls as a matter of institutional responsibility, reports suggest they were interpreted very differently elsewhere. According to various royal commentators, what some saw as stewardship, others reportedly viewed as a challenge. What some considered a protective measure, others allegedly perceived as a symbolic statement. And within that clash of perspectives, tensions that had been simmering beneath the surface for years suddenly found new fuel. Insiders whisper that frustration began spreading quickly throughout Sussex circles as speculation surrounding the alleged review intensified. While no official confirmation ever emerged regarding the exact nature of the discussions, the rumors themselves became impossible to ignore. Every new headline seemed to generate another question. Every anonymous source appeared to deepen the mystery, and with each passing day, the conversation shifted further away from administrative procedures and closer toward something far more emotional, the issue of belonging. For years, Prince Harry and Meghan had occupied a complicated position in the public imagination. To supporters, they represented independence, personal freedom, and a willingness to challenge established traditions. To critics, they symbolized a painful rupture within one of the world's most famous families. That divide had already shaped countless debates, interviews, documentaries, and media narratives. Now, according to various interpretations, the alleged jewelry review threatened to reopen many of those same wounds. The reason was simple. Symbolism matters within the monarchy. In some ways, symbolism matters even more than policy. Royal titles carry symbolic value. Residences carry symbolic value. Patronages carry symbolic value. And jewelry, perhaps more than almost any other royal possession, carries an extraordinary emotional weight. Because it connects individuals to a larger story. It links the present to the past. It links public identity to institutional legacy. As a result, even the suggestion that certain pieces were under review immediately sparked questions that extended far beyond ownership alone. Observers quickly began debating what the alleged actions actually represented. Were they simply administrative precautions designed to protect royal assets? Or were they intended to send a broader message about who remained connected to the institution and who did not? The absence of clear answers only intensified speculation. Television commentators dissected every rumor. Royal analysts offered competing interpretations. Online discussions exploded with theories, accusations, and predictions. At the heart of those debates lay a deeper and far more sensitive question. Where is the line between entitlement and stewardship? According to some commentators, individuals who have worn royal jewels during their time as working royals naturally develop personal connections to those items. Others argued that emotional attachment cannot override institutional obligations. It became a debate not simply about possessions, but about competing visions of responsibility itself. One side focused on personal association. The other emphasized long-term preservation. Neither perspective existed in isolation, and that is precisely why the controversy became so emotionally charged. As media attention intensified, public relations concerns reportedly began growing as well. Palace advisors, commentators suggested, were acutely aware that perception often shapes reality. Every rumor risked creating new narratives. Every unanswered question invited further speculation. Some observers worried that silence would be interpreted as confirmation. Others believed any response might only fuel greater controversy. It was a delicate balancing act with no obvious solution. Meanwhile, a broader conversation began emerging beyond the immediate dispute. Questions surrounding royal privileges, access, responsibilities, and obligations returned to the forefront of public discussion. The debate was no longer confined to a handful of alleged jewelry pieces. Instead, it was evolving into something much larger, a reflection of the monarchy's ongoing struggle to define itself during a period of profound transition. What made the situation even more remarkable was the growing realization that neither side appeared capable of controlling the narrative any longer. The story had escaped the confines of palace corridors and entered the court of public opinion, where speculation often travels faster than facts. Every development seemed to create new questions rather than answers. Every attempt to understand the controversy revealed deeper layers beneath it. And as tensions continued rising, it became increasingly clear that the alleged dispute was no longer about a review, a protocol, or even a collection of royal treasures. Yet the battle was rapidly becoming bigger than either side imagined. As pressure mounted, the monarchy's most experienced defenders reportedly moved into position. By this stage, the controversy had evolved far beyond the boundaries of a simple administrative review. What began as whispers about asset stewardship had grown into a broader struggle over legacy, authority, and the future direction of the institution itself. According to various interpretations, senior figures inside royal circles increasingly viewed the situation not as an isolated dispute, but as a test of whether long-standing traditions could withstand the pressures of a rapidly changing era. And if there was one figure uniquely positioned to confront such a challenge, many observers believed it was Princess Anne. For decades, Anne had cultivated a reputation unlike any other member of the royal family. While others attracted headlines, she built influence through discipline, consistency, and unwavering loyalty to the institution. Palace insiders have often described her as a guardian of tradition, someone who viewed royal service not as a privilege but as an obligation. Reports suggest that as concerns surrounding asset stewardship intensified, Anne became one of the strongest voices advocating for the preservation of established safeguards. To her supporters, the issue was simple. The monarchy could adapt to changing times, but it could not afford to abandon the principles that had sustained it for generations. Alongside Anne stood another figure whose influence was often overlooked by the public but rarely underestimated within royal circles: Prince Edward. Unlike many members of the family, Edward had spent years operating largely outside the spotlight, earning a reputation for quiet reliability rather than public attention. According to various interpretations, his role during this period was less visible, but no less important. Sources suggest he became a stabilizing presence behind the scenes, supporting efforts designed to strengthen institutional protections, while avoiding the public confrontations that had increasingly defined royal headlines. Together, Anne and Edward reportedly became part of a broader coalition, focused on continuity. It was during this period insiders claim that what some commentators began calling the heirs' accord gained renewed momentum. Whether the term reflected an official arrangement or merely a symbolic description remains unclear. Yet according to those who reference it, the concept represented an informal alignment among senior royals committed to protecting the institution's long-term interests above personal disagreements. The objective was not retaliation, it was preservation. As that alignment strengthened, reports suggest administrative reviews expanded significantly. Existing audits allegedly broadened in scope. Historical classifications were reportedly revisited. Documentation procedures became more rigorous. Oversight mechanisms received greater attention. None of these developments necessarily pointed toward conflict, yet together they painted a picture of an institution becoming increasingly determined to secure its foundations before future challenges could emerge. At the center of these efforts remained one overriding concern: the preservation of royal assets and heritage. According to palace observers, the issue was never simply about valuable objects. It was about maintaining continuity between generations. Every artifact, every document, every heirloom represented a connection to a larger story that stretched beyond any single individual. Those responsible for safeguarding that legacy reportedly feared that once institutional boundaries became uncertain, restoring them could prove far more difficult. That belief ultimately shaped the monarchy's response. Family relationships remained important, but according to various interpretations, institutional interests increasingly took priority. Decisions were allegedly evaluated through the lens of long-term preservation, rather than short-term emotions. It was a painful balancing act. After all, every royal controversy involves both personal and institutional consequences. Yet as pressure continued mounting, insiders suggest that the guardians of tradition became convinced that protecting the crown's future required difficult choices in the present. The result was a growing sense of unity among the monarchy's most experienced defenders. What had once appeared to be scattered concerns gradually transformed into a coordinated effort focused on safeguarding continuity. Anne's determination, Edward's quiet support, and William's expanding leadership reportedly combined to create a formidable alliance. The institution was no longer reacting to events. It was shaping them. And as that alliance strengthened, another reality became impossible to ignore. Because while advisors debated, reviews expanded, and safeguards tightened, the ultimate responsibility still rested with one man. Every path forward carried risks. Every decision threatened to deepen existing divisions. Every delay created new uncertainty. With the old guard united, King Charles found himself facing an impossible choice. At the center of the storm stood a king already burdened by illness, family division, and the weight of history. For all the speculation surrounding reviews, protocols, and internal debates, there remained one undeniable reality. Every road eventually led back to King Charles. While advisors offered recommendations, senior royals formed alliances, and commentators dissected every rumor, the monarch found himself carrying a responsibility unlike any other. According to various interpretations, he was not simply managing a controversy. He was attempting to preserve a family, while simultaneously protecting an institution that had survived for centuries. Those two goals, once closely aligned, now appeared increasingly difficult to reconcile. Reports suggest that Charles faced a dilemma few fathers would willingly endure. On one side stood Prince William, the heir to the throne and the figure many viewed as the future of the monarchy. On the other stood Prince Harry, his younger son, whose relationship with the institution had become increasingly strained over recent years. The divide between the brothers had already become one of the defining narratives surrounding the modern royal family. Yet according to palace observers, the alleged dispute over stewardship and royal assets threatened to deepen that divide even further. Complicating matters was the king's ongoing health struggle. Ever since concerns surrounding his condition entered public discussion, questions about succession, continuity, and long-term planning had grown impossible to ignore. According to royal commentators, every major decision now carried additional significance because it existed against the backdrop of uncertainty. Matters that might once have been delayed or quietly managed over many years suddenly felt more urgent. Time, in the eyes of many observers, had become a factor no one could afford to overlook. As pressure mounted, competing factions reportedly intensified their efforts to shape the conversation. Some voices allegedly argued that preserving family harmony should remain the highest priority. Others insisted that institutional responsibilities could not be compromised, regardless of personal consequences. Neither position lacked merit. That is what made the situation so painful. This was not a battle between obvious right and wrong. It was a conflict between competing loyalties, each carrying profound emotional weight. According to various interpretations, Charles found himself increasingly surrounded by difficult choices, with no perfect outcomes. Any decision risked criticism. Any compromise risked misunderstanding. Any delay risked creating even greater uncertainty. Palace insiders have often described the monarchy as an institution built upon continuity. But continuity itself can become fragile when family divisions intersect with questions of authority and legacy. The king reportedly understood that reality better than anyone. Meanwhile, concerns about the monarchy's future stability continued growing. What had begun as a discussion involving specific assets was now being viewed through a much broader lens. Observers increasingly questioned what precedent might be established. How would future generations interpret the decisions made during this period? What message would be sent about stewardship, responsibility, and the obligations attached to royal privilege? These questions extended far beyond the immediate controversy. They touched the very foundation of how the institution understood itself. It was within that atmosphere that reports of reluctant acceptance began circulating. According to various royal commentators, Charles may not have embraced every recommendation enthusiastically, but he allegedly recognized the larger concerns driving them. The preservation of institutional continuity, many argued, could not be postponed indefinitely. Difficult decisions were sometimes unavoidable. Painful compromises were sometimes necessary. And leadership often required accepting outcomes that carried personal costs. That realization reportedly marked a turning point. The focus gradually shifted away from individual disagreements and back toward the monarchy's enduring mission. The institution had weathered crises before. It had survived family disputes, public controversies, and moments of profound uncertainty. According to those closest to royal history, its survival had always depended upon one principle above all others: the willingness of each generation to place continuity ahead of personal preference. Yet even as that principle reasserted itself, the emotional consequences remained impossible to ignore. Relationships had been tested. Trust had been strained. Old wounds had been reopened. The cost of preserving stability was not measured solely in procedures or protocols, but in the human toll left behind. And still, the machinery of the institution continued moving forward, driven by a belief that its responsibilities extended beyond any single moment of conflict. By the time the debates began quieting and the rumors gradually lost momentum, something fundamental had changed. The controversy had exposed fault lines, clarified priorities, and reshaped perceptions across the royal landscape. The decisions made during this turbulent period would continue echoing long after the headlines faded. And when the dust finally settled, a new royal reality had emerged. Deep beneath palace walls, where generations of royal treasures have rested in silence, the final chapter of this dispute may already have been written. After months of speculation, conflicting narratives, whispered briefings, and mounting uncertainty, the story that began with questions about stewardship appears to have arrived at its defining moment. According to various interpretations circulating among royal observers, the focus gradually shifted away from personalities and returned to something far older and far more powerful: the institution itself. What once seemed like a controversy centered on individual interests had evolved into a debate about continuity, responsibility, and the future of one of the world's most enduring monarchies. Reports suggest that the assets at the center of the discussion ultimately became viewed through the lens that palace officials have historically favored: custodianship rather than ownership. Whether every rumor was accurate is almost beside the point. The larger significance lies in what the controversy revealed. For those responsible for safeguarding royal heritage, the issue was never simply about gemstones, heirlooms, or ceremonial treasures. It was about preserving a chain of continuity stretching across generations, ensuring that objects carrying institutional significance remained connected to the crown's enduring story, rather than the circumstances of any single moment. In many ways, the events described throughout this saga also marked an important moment in Prince William's evolution as a future monarch. According to royal commentators, this was one of the clearest examples yet of an heir increasingly willing to engage with difficult questions surrounding legacy and long-term stewardship. For years, William had been preparing for greater responsibility. Yet preparation and action are not the same thing. If reports surrounding the alleged reviews and consultations are even partially accurate, they suggest a figure no longer waiting for the future to arrive, but actively helping shape it. That shift carries significance far beyond the immediate controversy. Every generation of royal leadership faces its own defining challenges. Some confront political upheaval, others face constitutional uncertainty, still others inherit deeply personal family divisions. What matters most, according to many historians, is how those challenges are addressed. Throughout this story, supporters of the institution repeatedly return to one central principle: that stewardship requires difficult decisions, especially when those decisions involve competing loyalties. It is impossible to discuss that principle without acknowledging the lasting influence of Queen Elizabeth II. Even in her absence, her legacy appears woven throughout every aspect of this narrative. For 7 decades, she embodied continuity during periods of extraordinary change. Her approach to royal assets, traditions, and responsibilities helped establish the standards by which future decisions would inevitably be measured. According to many observers, the debates that emerged during this controversy reflected a broader effort to preserve the philosophy she spent a lifetime defending. That philosophy places extraordinary emphasis on stewardship. Within the monarchy's traditional framework, privilege and responsibility are inseparable. Titles carry obligations. Honors carry expectations. Access carries accountability. The same principle extends to assets viewed as part of the institution's historical identity. They are not merely inherited. They are safeguarded. They are not simply possessed. They are protected for those who will come after. For Harry and Meghan, the long-term implications of this period may continue to shape perceptions for years to come. Regardless of where public sympathies ultimately rest, the controversy reinforced the reality that their relationship with the institution remains one of the most closely scrutinized dynamics in modern royal history. Every development is interpreted through that lens. Every decision becomes part of a larger narrative. And every unresolved tension leaves lingering questions about what the future may hold. Yet perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this entire story is that it was never truly about conflict. Beneath the headlines, beneath the speculation, and beneath the endless debates, it remained a story about preservation. A story about what survives when personalities fade and generations pass. A story about an institution attempting to balance human emotion with historical responsibility. The jewels were never merely ornaments. In the eyes of the institution, they represented a sacred trust, one that belongs not to individuals, but to the enduring legacy of the crown. And as the vault doors reportedly closed once more, the message echoing through Windsor's ancient corridors was unmistakable. Duty would outlast every dynasty, every dispute, and every claim. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.